prisoners developing a drug problem behind bars has more than doubled in the last 5 years. That's according to the think tank Reform. It says the proportion of prisoners developing addiction issues has risen from 6.4% to 14.8% since 2013. Now, the government has pledged £100 million for improving prisons with what it calls airport-style security. That includes things like X-ray, body scanners. Well, let's get more on this now with criminal justice researcher at Reform, Aidan Shilson-Thomas. Aidan, good to see you. Why has there been this huge increase?
So prisons have seen a growing problem with drugs like spice for some time now. These drugs can make prisoners extremely violent and mentally unstable, and we're seeing their use in jails growing. Now, at the same time that drugs like spice can be more easy to smuggle into jails because spice can be sprayed onto prisoners' mail, as well as the more conventional ways of smuggling spice into jails, like smuggling it in on a person or throwing it over a wall, it might be fair to say that prison security has not been so quick to catch up with the problem. Now, the government is pledging, as you say, £100 million to improve prison security, and we really welcome this as a first step to addressing the issue. However, stopping drugs getting into prisons, most, but certainly not all of them, because with the best will in the world, you will not stop all drugs getting into prisons. Stopping drugs getting into prisons is not the same as helping prisoners to beat their addictions. So it's really important that when we stop the drugs coming in, we can focus on that, not only to create safer prisons, but also to make sure that when these people are released back into our communities, they don't go on to commit further offences.
Let's talk a bit more about spice, Aidan, because that is a huge problem in our prisons. Interesting to hear you say it can be sprayed onto mail. Talk to me about that.
Yes, so spice can be a liquid that is then sprayed onto things like perhaps legal letters or letters from family. Now, to the eye, that doesn't look like it's drugs, but then when prisoners get it in, they can roll up, they can smoke it, and then they can become affected by the drug. Now, there are certain machines that allow prisons to scan mail for traces of drugs like spice, so that these can be picked up. But the issue at the moment is that while some prisons might have this equipment, other prisons of the same security category might not. So when the government is pledging to introduce new security equipment, this is the kind of thing that they will be talking about. But as I say, buying this equipment is not the same thing as helping the prisoners in custody to tackle their addictions. For that, you need addiction services. You need a targeted approach to people who you know are using spice.
And what is the situation when it comes to that at the moment?
Again, the picture is very inconsistent across the estate. But the government has published a prison drug strategy last year, and in that strategy the government commits not only to reducing supply but also to reducing the demand for drugs. So while this security is an important first step to doing the first part of the strategy, the government may need to make sure that they also focus on the second.
And prisoners, of course, can be very inventive and they can get around things, as we know, and they're using all sorts of different methods. You talk about spraying liquid spice onto mail, but there are all sorts of ways that drugs are getting into prison, which many people will find incredulous.
Certainly, it would be fair to say that members of the public might not think that prisons would be the place where drugs would be easy to access, but for the reasons that we're discussing, that might not be the case. But there's an additional issue, which is that while the government wants to reduce drug use in prisons, as they should, to make prisons safer, they might want to improve the condition of the estate, and these are all really important things. The government also, while they do this, need to be having a really difficult conversation about whether prison is the right place, perhaps for drug users and non-violent offenders to be, because the Ministry of Justice, that's the government department that controls prisons, has evidence that community sentences might be, on average, more effective than custodial sentences for preventing crime from occurring when these people are released. So they might be more effective and they might also be cheaper. And when we look at these statistics about people coming into prison, developing drug problem, not tackling their offending behaviours, and then going out to offend again in our communities at very high rates, we need to ask really what value are we getting for that? Are we as a society safer for that? So we at Reform think that the government should be considering using alternative kinds of sentences, community sentences, to tackle certain types of criminality.
Very interesting, very concerning as well. Thank you very much for your time. Aidan Shilson-Thomas from Reform.
Thank you.